Hello, all. It's been a crazy few weeks. I quit my job, my appendix burst, I recovered, and then had an infection relapse. Went to LA, I got a new job, and then I quit that job. Craziness. I suppose I could use all that to excuse myself for taking forever to read this book, but honestly, I shouldn't. I could have found the time. I could have read in the hospital, but I didn't. I could have read in LA, but didn't. I was just being lazy. I fell into a reading slump a few months back, and I still struggle with it. But whatever. I just finished reading The Prince, and now I'm here to talk about it. This is the famous book by Niccolo Machiavelli, a classic of Western literature. I've been trying to make an effort to read more classics, so I picked up a used copy on eBay. The edition I read was from Penguin Classics, published 2009, translated by Tim Parks. This book was part of Penguin's Classics line, where they produced these small hardcover versions with some fancy pattern covers. Yes, it's for the crowd who wants to show off their pretty books. This being a classic, yeah, I fell into that trap. However, I bought it used, and from that I discovered Penguin just used some cheap paint to draw the patterns on these covers. My cover is just flaking off. I ended up with little bits of yellow clinging to my hands whenever I would read. I'd be really pissed if I paid full retail price for this kind of cheapness. But on a positive note, I will say that Penguin didn't cheap out on the paper. It's excellent quality, thick, heavy stock that is gleaming white. Very easy on the eyes. The book itself is an easy read. From its reputation, I expected a dense tome filled with amoral, hard-nosed advice from the West's original inventor of realpolitik. I expected a hard slog. It wasn't like that at all. The Prince is really just a long essay with Machiavelli giving advice on how to be a good leader based on his decades of service as a diplomat. It has this reputation for being this amoral, almost evil book that advises people to crush your enemies and friends alike. It's just not true, though. It's pragmatic. If you forced me to summarize the advice in this book in one sentence, I'd say, sometimes you have to do things that aren't pleasant, but you have to do it for the greater good. Let me give you a little more of the background on this book. I said this book reads like a long essay, and that's true, but it was originally written as a letter to Lorenzo de' Medici. By this time, Machiavelli was old and had fallen on hard times. He had a decades-long career as a diplomat for various rulers in Italy, but over those decades, he made enemies, and eventually those enemies had taken power, and now Machiavelli couldn't find work. This letter was his attempt to show off his intelligence and experience to a powerful Italian ruler with the hope that he would curry some favor and get a job. It didn't work out that way for Machiavelli, but he did turn this letter into a book that would scandalize Europe for its frankness and realism, and of course go down in history. If not for this book, I really doubt any of us would know his name. Because this began as a letter to a specific ruler, Machiavelli writes his advice with a focus on absolute rulers. So you have chapters focused on different kinds of armies and a consideration of mercenaries, or cruelty or compassion, whether it is better to be feared or loved. The obvious question is, why do people keep reading this? Absolute monarchy isn't very popular nowadays, and it's not like most of us are going to be kings. Well, you're supposed to tease out the lessons that apply to leadership in general, not just specifically for an absolute ruler. I'll tell you what I learned from this. Always broaden your power base. You are at your strongest when you can keep the mass of people you lead on your side. If you lose their support, you put yourself in the tenuous position of relying on others to keep in power, which usually turns into kind of an exercise in keeping plates spinning. Sure, you can do it for a while, but eventually you're going to drop one. Be decisive, because no one respects someone who tries to have it both ways. Choose your marshals or assistants, whatever, carefully. You need people who are going to have your goals in mind, not their own. They're going to reflect on you. And yes, fear is better for a leader because fear will keep people in line when times get tough. But if they only love you, their support will melt away in any kind of tribulation. And finally, I learned Machiavelli's reputation is not deserved. His advice and this book is not an ode to violence or double dealing like it's purported to be. Lots of his advice is grounded in the strength of the local people. Nations built around popular support are the strongest, as are armies assembled from the local population. I kind of want to call him a proto-Enlightenment figure. It was from the Enlightenment we get the ideas that people have inherent rights and that governments get legitimacy from the consent of the governed. Machiavelli doesn't go that far, but the importance he places on deriving your position from the popular support of your subjects makes me think that he would be very sympathetic to those ideas that would come about a century later. Lastly, though, I will mention the one thing I didn't like was the last chapter. It's Machiavelli's plea for Lorenzo de' Medici to be the great man who unites Italy and kicks out all the foreign influence. It sounded like such shameless ass kissing to me. I mean, throughout the book, Machiavelli was so reserved, but I guess he saved this kind of butt kissing for the very end. Still, I think this is a valuable book to read for someone who wants to build their foundation in Western literature and culture. Of course, if you're the kind of person who just loves to read your trashy airport softcover fiction, no, this isn't for you. This book requires a reader who is willing to actually think as they read. If that's you, yeah, The Prince is worth adding to your reading stack. Next for me, I'm going to pick up a book that my brother sent to me. I'll start reading Camus' The Stranger in maybe a day or two. I'm going into it totally fresh. I know nothing about it. It looks like a thin book, so hopefully I finish it off quickly and, not take forever to record another video. But thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube crap as usual. And have a good one, everybody.